Healthier Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is open to the press and public. The meeting is being broadcast live, and a recording of this meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. Please do not interrupt discussions until you have been notified of your intention to speak and have been invited to do so. Moving on to the agenda. I'd like to welcome members to the meeting. Geraint, do we have any apologies? Of course, Sue has just left, so we'll record her apologies.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. I've got Councillors Molson, Jeremiah and Councillor Seaborn.
Okay, here. Thank you, Geraint. Declarations of interest. Rebecca, could you please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interests to declare?
Thank you, members. So if I go through alphabetically, Councillor Clarkson?
None.
Thank you. Councillor Crick?
None.
Councillor Faye Jones?
Not that I know.
Councillor Janet Jones?
None that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And Councillor Overton, please.
No declarations, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Members, could you please state whether you have anything to raise in relation to the minutes? If not, I will take them as agreed. Veronica, you got your hand up, want to come in?
Yes, Chair. Just as a matter of information, I thought members of the committee would like to know that Jim Wright will be attending a governor's meeting at Cranbridge School to talk to the members of the governing body about what's entailed.
Okay, thank you for notifying the committee of that, Veronica. Okay.
Thank you, Richard.
Do you had something to add, Veronica?
No, I just can't get my hand down at the moment. It will come down in a minute.
Okay.
Sorry about
yes.
that.
Okay.
It's shaking itself.
Yes. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 5, action sheet. Rebecca, could you please run through the action sheet?
Sorry, Chair, I think there's one more set of minutes that you've missed off there, the last meeting for the population needs assessment.
Yes, awfully sorry.
That's okay.
Awfully sorry, Rebecca. I thought it was a typing error, and it was it was.
Sorry, no, because we had the special meeting, so there's two sets. An
repetition of the other minutes. So sorry, members. Members, could you please state whether you have anything to raise in relation to the minutes of the 10th of February? If not, I will take them as read. Okay, moving on to item 5, action sheet. Rebecca, could you please run through the action sheet?
Thank you, Chair. So as members will see, there's 4 actions listed there outstanding on the action sheet. I'm still chasing the first action, but I will get that to you via email as soon as I can. The next 3 then are regards to previous recommendations. the last of which I have sent you this morning from the last meeting on the population needs assessment. I doubt you've had a chance to go through those yet, but you have had them. So if you do have any feedback on those, please let me know and I'll go back to officers for you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, Gwent Regional Homelessness Strategy, Care Leavers and Homelessness for 16 to 25 years.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Phillips. I'm the team manager of TIPS, Torvine Young People Support Service. I don't intend to go through the report in its entirety today because I understand that you've had it in advance of today's meeting. But just to summarise 2 of the key points, the aim of the report and the aim of the strategy in Torvine is to reduce homelessness for care leavers alongside other vulnerable groups and for the continued development of key services and support for young people within Torvine.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Kate, can the I'm not quite sure if my list of attendees correlates with who is at the meeting. So, if there is anyone else who'd like to introduce themselves.
I'll go first. I'm Sue Goddard. I'm one of the group managers for Children and Family Services.
Yes, you are. Sorry, on the list, Sue, yes.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kesty Young. I'm the head of service for Llamai, who will soon be delivering the service to young people across Torvine from 1st of April.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rachel Lewis and I'm the Commissioning Manager for Social Care and Housing with oversight and responsibility for the Housing Support Grant Programme. Excuse the hoarseness in my voice, I'm struggling with a bit of a cold at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Thomas. I'm the Housing Solutions Manager for Torvine.
Okay, has everyone introduced themselves?
Chair, I think there's some invitees that you might like to welcome. They are on your list there.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, I'd also like to welcome Kath Gallivan and Kesty Young of Llamai and Heidi Bright and Dawn Hallmark James of Pobl Cymru.
Good morning, everyone. Happy St David's Day. I manage Hales House, which is currently the young person provision in Torvine. As of April, though, we will be going generic, so we'll be 16 plus.
Okay, thank you very much.
Apologies, Chair. I'm Kesty Young. I think I jumped the gun before, but my colleague Kath Gallivan is also with us, so I think she'll say hi.
Hi, I'm Kath Gallivan. I'm the Quality Assurance and Contracts Manager for Llamai, and my role will be to be looking after the supported housing projects for young people within the borough.
Okay, thank you very much.
And finally, it's Dawn Hallmark James, and I'm Area Manager for Monmouthshire and Torvine for Pobl Group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Kester has briefly introduced the report. Would anyone like to add any details to the report before we go to questioning? No. If then we'll proceed to our questions. And I have the first question. So, key messages. Recognition of challenges, how COVID-19 has impacted on service delivery across both social care and housing. How has the pandemic impacted TIPS and the housing support services for care leavers, and what lessons have been learnt?
I can take this one, I think.
Okay.
In terms of directly affecting care leavers, our drop-in has been closed for most of the pandemic, so young people have not been able to drop into the drop-in as they did previously. We are hoping to be able to reopen that fairly soon. However, young people have shown themselves to be incredibly resilient in terms of adapting to the remote way of working or in service engagement in the same way as staff. So they've actually welcomed some developments in terms of joining meetings, for example, remotely and using technology, which they're perhaps more comfortable with than we are in some respects. In terms of service delivery, the youth service has been outstanding in Torfaen in terms of working in partnership with social care. They delivered hot food throughout the pandemic to young people who were living independently. They offered assertive outreach safely and within risk assessments right from the start, really, in terms of once we came out of the first lockdown, and were instrumental in keeping in touch with some of the most vulnerable care leavers across the borough.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on to the second question. Janet, like to ask your question, please?
Do you want? Oh, sorry, Chair. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. We've read your presentation. My question is based on paragraph 3.2. Service users do not merely reside, present or need support and accommodation within a single county boundaries. Do we house any of our young people outside the borough? And alternatively, do we house young people from other local authorities within Torfaen?
Cheryl, should we do this one together?
Yeah, do you want me to cover our side first? Right,
yeah.
From a housing solutions point of view, we try and keep everybody in borough wherever possible. However, with the added pressures that we've experienced over the last 2 years, we have placed people outside Torfaen. There is no B&B in Torfaen that operates with us at the current time. So we have placed clients outside Torfaen for a short period of time and brought them back into borough when we have vacancies within that. We are developing our portfolio of stock. We've got some semi-supported housing schemes being brought on by providers, and obviously we're looking at the Pearl House building to change that into semi-supported housing schemes in the future as well. So hopefully future plans will be that we won't use B&B as much as we are currently have been over the last 2 years. Kate, do you want to do the next bit?
Yeah, I would echo that, Cheryl. We have had to place young people outside the borough in a state of emergency, really, particularly at the start of the pandemic. That has lessened significantly, and we have been able to develop our temporary accommodation unit in Thornhill, which has assisted greatly in terms of holding young people prior to them usually entering Hales House as a route through the system, which avoids the use of out-of-county bed and breakfast where possible.
Can I come back in, please? What?
Sorry, Mr. Jones, you've popped yourself on mute.
You are still muted, Janet.
What is the maximum time that these young people have been housed outside the borough, please?
It varies from young person to young person. We currently face a number of challenges in terms of complex needs with a particular group of young people with various issues. It's usually co-presenting of usually offending behaviour and antisocial behaviour. We have had young people placed as little as a number of days and as much as a number of months.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Sorry about the problems.
Don't worry, I think we'll have you're muted on our brains for a very long time, Janet.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is from Councillor. Councillor Crick, like to come in. You have your hand up.
Yes.
You're muted now, Councillor Crick.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you for letting me come in, and I believe Councillor Jones also wanted to raise an issue there. Kate's comment about challenging behaviour. Do we then, whilst they're out of area, are we still supporting them with providing extra support to try and resolve some of the issues that they've got, Kate?
Yes, any young person, whether they're a care leaver or not a care leaver, if they're open to Torvine Young People Support Service, they will continue on a support plan. That support plan is then reviewed regularly with members of the young person's family, other professionals who may be involved, and partner agencies. We have recently been using Section 115's the problem-solving group meetings with police fairly frequently to address some of the more challenging young people in terms of antisocial behaviour or county lines, for example.
Yes.
There have been a group of young people recently with complex mental health issues who we've supported in that way as a joined-up way of working, regardless of where they're living, to identify and to try and manage risk and concern.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Fay-Jones would like to come in.
Yes, please. Thank you. My concern is you're putting them in bed and breakfast out of county, and I'm sure they've been rigorously checked, but in the back of my mind I just think of Caerphilly a couple of years back and what happened there in a bed and breakfast, and I just wondered, are you always happy with the bed and breakfast you're able to acquire, and how often do you do the checks, and how much do you keep in touch? I know we've touched on this with Councillor Crick's question, but I just wondered what was the, was it 2-3 times a week when you keep in touch, and what were the checks like beforehand? Thanks.
It varies young person to young person and area to area. The bed and breakfast, and we only have one young person currently placed beyond Torvine. The bed and breakfast that we use are always bed and breakfasts that have been recommended to us by other areas. So where they are out of Torvine, they are establishments that are used by other boroughs. We don't use random bed and breakfasts that have not been checked by other areas.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Faye, and I believe Cheryl, do you want to come in? Your hand up?
Yes, please. Just to add on to what Kate just said, we work alongside other local authorities to discuss placements as well. So if we need to use a bed and breakfast outside Torvine, we link in with that respective local authority to make them aware that we are placing a young person in their buildings.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Faye, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, I would. It's regarding 4.2 on our report, developing clear pathways for young people leaving care. Further work is underway to formally agree via the homeless allocations policy to enable discussions between social care, housing and registered social landlords to enable young people to have a positive outcome to housing options. Do our housing associations sufficiently prioritise housing support for young care leavers up to the age of 25?
It's a mixed response. I think generally it's very positive, and there is a lot more awareness and understanding now of the complex needs these young people bring with them with regards to the social landlords. The processes and procedures for care leavers are very, very clear and have been for a very long time in partnership with Hales House, with the local homelessness strategy team. The commissioning are heavily involved in that respect as well. There's always work to be done, I think, in terms of a full understanding of these young people and the challenges they bring with them. But certainly in terms of the clear pathway, the gold banding for care leavers, which remains enforced and has been enforced and has been an example of good practice in Torvine for a very long time, those pathways are very clear for that group of young people, so for the category 1, 2 and 3 young people who we're talking about. In terms of resolving tenancy issues, from my perspective, that's improved as well in terms of partnership working with key professionals within the police, for example, and community safety, and working with health. The transition from children to adult services is particularly positive at the current time in terms of an understanding, a mutual understanding across the two divisions for social care, and ongoing work is developing in terms of supported housing, which is Rachel and Cheryl could talk more about. But in terms of preparing young people for their tenancies, that is improving, and then the response from the social landlords is improving in turn. Bronavon's continue to hold most of the stock for our young people.
Could I just ask you on that? Do you use things like the MIST service to help where young people got very complex needs to help with their placement?
Yes, I think that 16 plus currently have the highest number of missed young people in terms of social care at the current time, and MIST remain involved alongside the leaving care social worker and the young person's advisor, generally until around 18, 19, but that can be extended up to 21 where needed. MIST are a key part of our service as well in terms of recognising the complex needs and working with the family in particular to help resolve some of those issues.
Yeah, that's very good news. I was just going to ask you as well, can you sort of identify which housing groups maybe you have a weakness in the link with?
I can only speak from 16 plus perspective. There have been challenges with Bronavon historically. That has improved, and actually I think it's improved during COVID, possibly because of the restrictions in terms of reducing evictions, etc. That's helped some tenants in some way. And Bronavon have a better open door policy now than they have perhaps at times in the past.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next question. I can't see any hands up, so moving on. Councillor Linda Clarkson, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Looking at a question around paragraph 4.2 again. For the young people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness, what range of emergency accommodation are we currently using and providing? And with move on to more settled accommodation, I was wondering whether we're using HMOs at the moment and whether young people are getting any support with entering into those tenancy agreements.
Do you want me to take this one, Kate?
Yes, Sharon.
Yeah. We use a range of emergency units of accommodation for all clients. Obviously work very closely with TIP service around a young person coming through to do that joint assessment to make sure we've got the best placement for that young person. We've got limited units for temporary accommodation, which has been under huge pressure through COVID with the change in the guidance from Welsh Government, everybody in. So we've got a number of shared units that are managed by a private landlord that we place in, and they provide daily support there. But obviously our support providers can also attend those schemes as well for young people and all other client groups as well. The move on into permanent accommodation is significantly slow for a single person due to the demand and the availability of single person accommodation across the RSLs and the private sector. At the moment, the average stay for a young person or a single applicant in temporary accommodation is up to a year. We've got Hales House that work very closely with us. They offer obviously 24-hour support in Hales House, and they do a support plan with the young person to get that person tenancy ready. They do another number of projects within the scheme to allow that young person to understand the responsibilities of holding a tenancy, and perhaps Heidi can come in on one of those projects. So that person is then tenancy ready to stop that revolving door of homelessness wherever possible. Obviously, we're now developing semi-supported housing schemes, so we've got that step down. So Hales House at the moment is 24-hour support. The step down projects being developed are semi-supported housing, so we've got floating support going into those. And if we can see a young person is perhaps failing in that, we've got the option to move them step back into the 24-hour scheme. And that's what the future plan is going to be. They can step up, they can step down until that person is tenancy ready to hold a tenancy of their own. Because what we don't want is to have that revolving door and a young person come back to us after 12 months' time. So to save as much as possible, Rachel's just put her hand up, we've got a lot of commissioning services and support providers to support that young person through that transition from semi-supported into independent housing. But Rachel is going to come in, and I'll get Heidi to come in on one as well.
Absolutely, thanks for that, Cheryl. And I suppose sort of we've been working hard over the last year or so to really look at our supported housing stock, to reconfigure it so it's fit for purpose to meet the needs of our population, including our young people. So what we hope we will see over the next sort of 12 to 18 months is an increase in that supported accommodation supply with varying levels of support available. But equally, I suppose I wanted to flag that sort of when people do move into their own tenancies, we do have an extensive range of floating support services that can follow those individuals through to ensure that those tenancies are therefore sustainable. Should they run into any unforeseen issues or problems, they are able to access support straight away. We've got an extensive range of support to be able to meet the needs of those individuals, whether they be a young person who's struggling with their mental health, whether sort of they are struggling with sort of more financial issues. We're really kind of looking at the provision and flexing and responding to those needs.
Yeah, so just on the back of Cheryl and Rachel, really, one thing we've responded to with the remodel of our tender is the introduction of a move-on resettlement worker who will specifically be that person of link, because what we have done, and if we look back over the last several years, we've actually provided the young people with a voice, given them more options of move-on. We've avoided the culture of a one-size-fits-all. Many years ago, it's very limited options for young people, specifically in Torfaen, but we've now got a lot of options with Wyn Road, Brookside, private sector, even more going into their own accommodation, and floater support in the SAS project. So there's a vast amount of options now for young people and care leavers as to what there was years ago, significant, but it's making sure that for Hales House that we've got that person in position that's able to join those links for move on, which is appropriate for that young person.
Okay, Rachel, you still have your hand up? Do you want to come back in?
Apologies, Chair, it's what we're calling a legacy hand these days.
That's a legacy hand, okay.
Could I come back in just to say thank you for that comprehensive response, Chair? And yeah, it was that floating, the step up, step down. I think that's going to make a lot of difference, and that ongoing support once they are into a tenancy situation, which may have been lacking in the past and has caused young people to slide and get into difficulty. That's really good news to know that we've evolved the services to that level. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so Councillor Faye Jones to ask the next question.
Yeah, this is again is 4.2, and I think we've answered some of the question, but just to summarise, I just wondered, I won't go through the whole question, but just to ask, how well are we working, do we feel now in this multi-agency arena? I know you now say you've got a new officer. I just wonder, could you go into that a little bit more? Thanks.
We have had the vacant CAMS post for around a year, but that was successfully filled in January by a qualified CPN. And already she's making a significant difference to the team in terms of linking in directly with CAMS and directly with open door services in terms of liaison and crisis intervention, and also providing support and advice to carers and to parents in terms of young people who are experiencing mental health difficulties specifically. The significant challenge at the moment in TIPS, in 16 plus, is mental health alongside county lines. And I think we've got strengthening links with CAMS and also with local police and community safety. I think they've been very proactive in terms of trying to achieve the balance between care and control in terms of acknowledging the level of need and presenting difficulty of these young people, whilst reflecting that they are sometimes risky within the community, and sometimes that requires careful handling on both parts. I think in terms of the multi-agency working, we've got our platform worker within TIPS now, so working specifically with young people in tenancies who have mental health issues. The psychiatric outreach worker is back. We have mediation services supplied by Clamai in an effort to keep people home where possible, because the focus on non-care leavers remains. If a young person can remain in the care of their parents safely at home and avoid homelessness, that's what we would always want to achieve, and the mediation service helps to manage that. In terms of the other links, YOS continue to be a very helpful source of support in terms of specifically substance misuse services, and Women's Aid and the domestic violence advocates are also key in terms of some of the more vulnerable young people we've got in challenging situations with regards to domestic abuse. And I don't know whether Rachel wants to come in on that in terms of supported services.
Absolutely, and I think what we've done quite successfully as partner agencies is share intelligence, share information around sort of the trends that are affecting young people, which has enabled us to be quite innovative, to reconfigure and to pilot different ways of working that are bespoke to young people. One of those examples being, sort of as Kate has mentioned, sort of our young people who are experiencing domestic abuse, and I think sort of through conversation with a range of partner agencies, they present in a different way and need a different style of support. There's the influence of social media and how that impacts on the behaviour. So we've worked with partners around this table and around other tables, indeed, to develop something that's a bit more bespoke to meet that need, to pilot and see what's working, what we can mainstream into our other services, but equally where we need to do something a little bit more specialist and bespoke, we have been able to respond in that way.
Could I just come back there? I'm just thinking of a few things I've dealt with as a counsellor recently, and there's often difficulty from the community, the young people are put in, and the perception of people in the community, and sometimes what the community has to put up with. Do you feel sometimes that, perhaps people have put young people in the wrong place, and how do you manage with that?
I think it's a delicate balance of the young person's right to social housing and also what types of communities those young people are being placed into. And I think sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. What has changed in the time that I've been in Torvine is the speed at which those things are responded to on both sides, in terms of either educating the local community about some of the challenges these young people have or bring with them, but equally where their behaviour becomes unmanageable or too risky or unacceptable, that those evictions do happen, and they do happen. They are rare, but I think what I've certainly seen a change is the multi-agency working around those young people to make it very clear and transparent and fair for everyone to see why, when that does have to happen, why that has to happen, so the young person understands it and can learn from that, but also the local community feel protected. And I think that's the key part of certainly TIPS working in partnership with very closely with the police and community safety. That's worked really, really well for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Faye. Next question. I think this has partially been answered, but I'm going to ask it in case any further comment is required. So still on the agenda item 4.2, ensure that appropriate support and interventions are in place to help young people to remain in appropriate accommodation. TIPS has successfully appointed to the position of community psychiatric outreach worker, CPO, in partnership with CAMS, providing care and support to young people at risk of homelessness due to poor emotional / mental health. Can you provide us with more background as to the necessity for this post and the work they will be undertaking?
The post has existed in TIPS since its inception in 2007. So there's always been a CAMS buy-in to TIPS, and there's always been a post. It just has been vacant for around a year because of the previous staff member moving on. The necessity came about to try and ensure that young people had a very clear and fast access to CAMS where needed, whether that was in crisis or as part of planned ongoing work. MIST has been mentioned here today, and obviously MIST provide intensive specialised support to a small proportion of care leavers. A large number of care leavers may never require mental health support, but a number dip in and out of the services over time, and the Kapow post is specifically designed to respond to crisis quickly, dynamically, and with an end result for young people. So either that's an entry into core CAMS services, or it's a referral or signposting elsewhere, or it's there's no further action required. That specifically was to ensure that we were conducting holistic assessments for young people that weren't just based on social care or housing, because it's very rare you find a young person who becomes homeless with no other issues attached. There's usually other stuff going on for that young person. And that post specifically was designed to break down the barriers as well that can sometimes exist between social care and health in terms of a joined up working and a joined up approach. They also have proved invaluable in terms of keeping young people at home where parents or carers are concerned about emerging emotional health issues or mental health issues. That the most recent example has been a young person with an eating disorder, for example, where the parent was very concerned about their behaviour, and the Kapow has become involved in that respect, and that has lessened the parents' anxieties and made the situation far easier for that family and better able to manage and understand that young person's needs. Other young people where they're beyond parental control, for example, there's been some counselling advice put in there in terms of assisting parents and carers to understand the young person's needs and reasons for that behaviour, and also for older care leavers who come out of the system and who've re-engaged at 21, 22, 28. They do come back into Torfaen, and that post is available to offer advice and support and signposting there also.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. Would Councillor Clarkson like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, this has been touched on, but trying to sort of get some more specific information and maybe add some information if you've got it available. It's again looking at ensuring appropriate support interventions are in place for young people to remain in accommodation, and 4.2. Thinking specifically of Hales House, and that the service will be reconfigured from April 2022 to support a wider range of single people experiencing homelessness. What we were wondering is, can you expand on how the service will be reconfigured, and also how these facilities are currently being used, what the level of throughput is for Hales House? And I know we've said that it varies for individuals, but whether or not there's sort of a pattern that sort of comes out of that. And again, on the issue of antisocial behaviour, are you having issues there still? They have been in the past, and what sort of support on a 24-hour basis is sort of in place to help deal with that and prevent the tensions within the community?
Okay, I can step in and answer some of those, hopefully. The reconfiguration of Hales House is to offer a wider range of provision for our single homeless population. I think Cheryl touched upon earlier on sort of it's an area that's been exacerbated through the pandemic, and it's part of a wider plan, which some of you may be more familiar with under the guise of the Phase 2 plan, which was the Welsh Government's funding response to the pandemic. So we're looking at our supported accommodation stock across the board, and looking at our emergency accommodation stock across the board to be more responsive to the needs of our community, and particularly those who are single people who are experiencing homelessness. So in essence, the reconfiguration involves removing some of the age criteria around Hales House to offer it to a wider clientele. That said, we're not taking provision away from young people, and we've been working hard in the background with a range of partners and providers to develop other accommodation options. So that links into the T Cuffler development, which is an 8-unit provision. We are also, many of you are familiar with the Pearl House development, which is currently in the planning phase at the moment, to be able to bring more single unit accommodation on board, as well as smaller units. I think what we're kind of in a position is we're responding to a growing need, but equally sort of looking at what works best for young people. And sometimes it isn't always a larger 20-bed hostel provision. What we have considered as part of the reconfiguration of Hales House is how we can best use that facility. It's a really sort of flexible provision in essence, that can be zoned appropriately, sort of based on sort of the occupation and the resident need there at the time. And Heidi, I'm sure, will be able to talk through some of those wider plans as well. Within Hales House, it is a 24/7 provision. It will remain so. It will remain sort of supported accommodation, so people sort of who are accommodated there will be allocated a support worker. They will be encouraged and assessed to work through a support plan to enable sort of independent living, and to move on to the right accommodation for their needs, whether that be a more sort of semi-supported accommodation environment or independent living. So, you know, on that premise, that remains the same. But what we are aiming for is a wider range of accommodation and support to better meet the needs of our homeless population.
Okay, thank you. Heidi, you'd like to come in, please?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Hales House, anyone, especially during these times now, we've got a little bit less restrictions, more than welcome to come and visit the scheme. We've always been quite open doors to any visitors. But we're a 20-bed unit with 10 bed sets upstairs and downstairs. We recognised many years ago that we were able to fob, so to speak, certain areas of the building, that we were able to have more of a quieter area for people that are in education, mental health, learning difficulties, that just needed to be sort of have a little bit less quieter area within the scheme. We're able to expand on that now as well, because we're 10 upstairs and 10 downstairs. It allows us the flexibility to fob off more areas. How that will work, we could potentially look at age range, but as you know, depending on the presentations coming through the scheme, we'll always have a varied age. So it will come down to individuals, which is how we've always worked. We've looked at individuals, and again, it's that person-centred approach, looking at the risks of an individual and what support package is needed around that person. In regards to antisocial behaviour, we have seen a huge, again, significant decrease attached to the service for that. A couple of stats for you. If we were looking for 2016 to 2017, our evictions at that stage were 13. The following year, that reduced down to 9. The following year after that, we were 1, and then we've been 1 and 2 for the last year and 2 for the previous year. And those evictions tend to have been around service charge for 2 of them, or extreme behaviour. But with elastic tolerance, a young person's stay has been significantly longer, so they're more embedded into the service, and that is proven then when they're moving into their own tenancy, they're sustaining it. We've had 9 move-ons for last year. All of those 9 young people are still within their accommodation within the 12-month period, and they're just coming up to the 12-month period. And for this period, we're on 6 successful move-ons into resettled accommodation via Home Seeker, and to date, all those 6 people are in their own accommodation as well. So a lot of that goes down to partnership work, touching back on Kate previously with the CAMS worker that they're having within TIPS. We saw the benefits of that previous worker being able to do that responsive working with the young people.
Thank you very much. That's really useful information, and it really does demonstrate the improvement to the service and how it's impacting on the quality of the service for young people. Thanks a lot.
Janet, do you have your hands raised? Would you like to come in?
Yes, I do, Chair. We've got representatives from Pobl and Lamar with us. Could you ask them on their perception how they feel that the multi-agency involvement is working for their perspective on things, please, Chair?
Okay, I'm from Pobl. I think Lamar just left unless there's someone else coming. Oh yeah, there is, isn't there? Sorry. Yeah, I think it's worked very, very well, particularly in the last couple of years, because of the restrictions. There was a sort of blended approach to our support. I'm also at the moment managing a young person's complex needs resettlement service. That will be going to Lamai from the 1st of April. We didn't stop going out. We did visit clients. Obviously, all necessary precautions were taken, like PPE and what have you. But it really did, I think, if it did anything, this COVID pandemic, it did bring us together, and we saw the benefit of working together. There's also a Welsh Government funded scheme that I manage, and it has been sort of put upon. It's called YPSAS, which is a young person's shared accommodation scheme. We've been successful for the 3rd year in gaining the funding. So what that is, we get properties throughout Gwent. We're working with the housing associations to try and get them. So we will match young people, perhaps coming out of the 24-hour support, like Hales House, into shared accommodation. Basically, after 6 months, if they're still happy where they are and they've matched well, then they will be offered a full AST tenancy agreement.
Thank you very much. Much appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Okay, I'm going to ask the next question, and it is around the subject of single occupancy. What actions do we take to ensure loneliness and isolation are not issues for our young care leavers? How do we bring them together with peers in their own age group? And do we take steps to accommodate them close to family links? Also, is there a digital deficit? And how do we, with our partner agencies, ensure our young people have... sorry, my screen went off. How to ensure that with our partner agencies that young people have digital access?
In terms of the isolation and loneliness, TIPS are running groups again in partnership with the youth service to try and bring together young people of a similar level of need or a similar level of presenting issue to form and maintain supportive friendships with each other. Part of that is about not creating dependency on services, and part of that is that when you are 19 living alone in your own tenancy, it can be very isolating and it can be quite scary for some young people for various reasons. And our feeling is that they are best off trying to maintain supportive friendships alongside family relationships, as well as the paid relationships they have with professionals. In terms of provision of supported housing, that's helped a great deal recently with the development of the enhanced support service, where young people are placed in their own tenancies that are managed by Pobl and have support workers assisting them and supporting them within their own homes, that's gone some way to addressing the physical isolation and loneliness. In terms of the youth service, they have been phenomenal in terms of offering outreach support for the most vulnerable care leavers, who we've identified as the ones that we're concerned about in terms of being particularly marginalised, particularly during the peak of the pandemic. In terms of group work, the cookery lessons have restarted, for example. So we run a small cookery group to teach young people how to cook and budget for healthy meals. That's been reasonably well taken up. I think young people are coming out of the kind of pandemic the same as everyone else in terms of being a little bit reluctant at times to access face-to-face support sometimes. In terms of the rest of the question, could you repeat the end part for me? Sorry, in terms of...
Yes, the last part of the question is how do we ensure with our partner agencies that young people have digital access?
Yes. It's long been felt by the care leaver community that there should be consideration given to free Wi-Fi for care leavers, and it's something the young people bring to me frequently in terms of digital poverty, because the young people feel very strongly as a group, and I can't speak for the wider group of young people, but I imagine it is echoed across the population, that access to free Wi-Fi is something that you would reasonably expect if you were living within a home environment with family. So in terms of basic need, the young people feel strongly, and I can see Heidi nodding her head, is that is something that is now considered a basic need for young people. It allows them access to the benefit system, for example. It allows them access in terms of applying for jobs, maintaining their CVs, keeping in touch with their family and friends. It remains that some young people simply can't afford Wi-Fi and can't afford to be digitally included due to the level of finances they're currently living on. But I think we've got 2 members now in corporate parenting panel from 16+, and that's something that they intend to bring to the agenda on a regular basis in terms of how we can address that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Kate. For Hales House, Wi-Fi is provided free of charge. It was something that Pobble implemented quite earlier on, especially with the introduction of universal credit and that expectation. And for the scheme for itself, they're treated as 20 individuals, but they come together as their own community within that service. And there is a client constitution as well, which encourages that lead and peer mentoring as well, with platform that was introduced again to support each other and break down that loneliness.
Okay, Kath Galvin, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Catherine Lam, I just wanted to echo really what Kate and Heidi have said. In terms of our supported housing projects, we offer free Wi-Fi to all our young people that are resident with us. And then in terms of the loneliness thing, there's an old saying, you could be lonely in a crowd full of people. So we try to ensure that it is young person led in terms of what they like to do. We look a lot at our community-based activities and supporting them to access community-based activities such as libraries and gyms, so they're not sort of isolated within the project that they live in. But in terms of internally and in the houses that they live, it is very much young person led, and although we've got lots and lots of ideas and activities they can take part in, there's always something from the left field that we don't ever think about and young people bring up themselves, and we do our very best to sort of make that happen for them. And we're also lucky enough to get little pockets of funding externally, and external agencies coming in doing sort of, if you like, digital workshops with them, or we've got one at the minute up in one of our Caerphilly areas where they're doing sort of theatre work and spoken word poetry and arty stuff. So that's always really helpful when we can bring in, people from outside the organisations to give us a hand and tick all the boxes that the young people want, really.
Okay, would Dawn like to come in, please? You have your hand raised.
I do, thank you. Just to let you know, again, on the young person's shared accommodation scheme, we've started workshops called Safe Space, where they're talking about healthy relationships, mental health, gender stereotypes, LGBTQ experiences. We offer courses, workshops on CV writing. These are available not just to the YP SAS clients, but we share it across all the partners. So that's something else that's available for the young people.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the three of you for a very comprehensive answers. I'd like to ask. Rachel, you have your hand up. Want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, really, across all of the supported accommodation provision and floating support services, our support workers work very closely with young people to develop a plan that will help them sustain their accommodation. And that goes much broader than just paying your bills on time and basic living independent skills, but it's much wider than that. It's around integrating into the community, building those meaningful connections within the community, so they've got not only a house that they can call home, but a community that they're fully part of as well. Those plans are, like the colleagues have said around the virtual screen here, are developed based on those needs of the individual, and they're very bespoke to those individuals and take a very holistic view.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel, for those additional and well-received comments. I'd like to ask Linda to ask the next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question's around paragraph 6.4. It states there that 17 young people have experienced homelessness, and sort of without looking at any sort of specifics, did any trend, or was there anything we learned from what went wrong in those cases, and what could have been done differently, or how they could have been prevented? And do we feel that there's an increase in young people experiencing homelessness right now? And has that number increased, or has it remained stable, gone down?
If I addressed the 17 that I've drawn attention to, Cheryl, initially, those 17 include young people who may have had a period of homelessness and then been rehoused, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they have continued to be homeless. It's they've experienced homelessness, which is how we report those figures back. So a young person, for example, may have been made homeless from home, moved into Hale's house, moved on from Hale's house successfully or unsuccessfully, and then come back into other provision. They may have moved into temporary accommodation, been evicted from that temporary accommodation, or moved on, or decided to leave on their own accord to live with friends or family, which we can't prevent, and then come back round. Other young people have been care leavers who have been placed in their own accommodation and for whatever reason haven't made a success of that. They may have a period of homelessness within that 3 years and then come back in and re-access support and services. The proportion of young people who remain homeless remains very small, Cheryl, in my opinion, in terms of they are the young people generally with the most complex co-presenting needs. So you may have a young person who has a history of abusive relationships, domestic violence, substance misuse, problematic family relationships and poor mental health. And those are the young people who tend to be the ones that we see who struggle to maintain any kind of accommodation. Efforts continue to engage those young people and they remain open to services, but a very small proportion do continue to have that cycle. Anecdotally, and I don't have the figures in front of me, I think homelessness has decreased in terms of presentations. I think the challenge we're currently facing is provision in terms of move on. So that blockage that was occurred, and Cheryl could talk far more eloquently than me about that, but that blockage that happened due to COVID that has meant no one moved through, but people were still coming in at one end, but no one was moving through the other. So that has caused lasting issues for us, not necessarily amongst the care leaver population, because they've got a level of protection compared to other young people. But currently, I think we have 2 young people who've lost tenancies, for example, in the last 12 months, which is low.
If I can come in to support what Kate is saying, I think under the young age group, we have seen low numbers of people coming through homelessness. And like Kate said, as a looked after child, they've got that added protection around them. But through the pandemic, I got to say that we've seen a significant increase in homelessness generally in that perhaps 18 to 25-year age group, where family relationships were broken down, pressures were put onto families there. So we've seen a significant increase. And what Kate is saying is absolutely right. Our temporary accommodation got totally blocked because the RSLs wasn't doing any allocations or sign-ups of properties. So we've seen that slightly moving now. So we are seeing some throughput. People are getting rehoused, albeit the single applicants will always be waiting longer purely by the availability of single-person accommodation across the borough, across all sectors as well. So we are seeing a slight move on, but the pressure on homelessness and people presenting every day, we're seeing it on a daily basis. I think on average now we're seeing probably 18 households per week coming through, and for Torvine to have that number coming through is quite high for our borough.
It may be worth adding that obviously in terms of the homeless young people that my team deal with, it's 16 to 18-year-olds, and obviously the youth homelessness is 18 to 25. So that's the slight difference between the 2 agencies in terms of me supporting 16 to 18-year-olds and then Cheryl alluding to the kind of housing and homelessness issues for the 18 to 25 population. So they're almost subdivided.
Yeah, I think what Cheryl has highlighted there is what we're experiencing as councillors, is it's the 18 to 25 and 25 to 35-year-old age group as well, who are experiencing much higher numbers of significant issues of homelessness. And it is something that is going to be our ongoing crisis to try and prevent and deal with. It's good to know looked after children have got the priority, but we know there are some very complex individuals in that 18 to 25-year-old group. So how Cheryl, do you see we can actually, you say there's some throughput now, but is there anything that we could sort of think of that may be able to ease these issues?
It's the availability of stock. That's the biggest problem. The RSLs have got limited 1-bedroom units of accommodation throughout Torvine, and that's caused us huge problem because everybody on the register, the highest proportion of people on our common housing registers are single applicants across all the bands. So we get a portion of that properties on the weekly advert allocated for preference for homeless band. And as I say, a single applicant now is waiting 12 months or more for permanent housing. But if we go back to what Rachel and we all explained earlier on, the development of the semi-supported housing schemes that we've got planned under phase 2, that will give that mixture of accommodation, because not everybody is ready to move into their own accommodation. Some clients need that extra support. So to have that options of Hales House for intensive support, the step down into semi-supported, and then that drop back and pick up, we'll be able to do that. But it's how soon we can get those units of accommodation into our portfolio. That's our biggest barrier at the moment. And the support providers are there. It's having those units of accommodation, because if we take a unit of accommodation from the RSL to develop a project, that's one less property going through the common housing register as well. So we're kind of in that vicious circle. The private rented sector at the moment is way beyond affordability for anybody on benefits, especially young people, with the local housing allowance rates being so low. And, we're always banging that drum on Welsh Government meetings and network meetings to say that needs to be reviewed, because a single applicant under 35 gets the shared room rate of £35 a week. An average rent on PRS at the moment, you're talking £150 plus. We've certainly seen the PRS sector be outsourced now for anybody, not just a young person, but anybody on basic benefits. PRS now has been outpriced for them, which is a sad factor really for us as well.
Right. Okay, thanks for answer. Not the best news, but it's where we are. Thank you.
Janet, would like to answer the next question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is in reference to paragraph 6.6. 3 people entered the criminal justice system and entered custody for a period of time. Again, without referencing specifics or individuals, have we learnt lessons as to how we can prevent any further young people entering the criminal justice system in the future?
All 3 of those young people were persistent prolific offenders, so they're young people who have a significant criminal history and have done for a period of time. For all 3 of those young people, it wasn't their first period of time in custody, and one of those young people remains in custody. The primary driving factor behind all 3 of those young people were drug issues and some underlying mental and emotional health issues, but primarily an addiction to substances that then has fueled their offending behaviour. I think in terms of numbers, we would like there to be none, but in terms of the historically, care leavers have been very overrepresented in custody, and for Torfaen those figures are actually very, very low. What impact the pandemic has had on people going to custody, I'm not sure as yet, and that we may find that there is a link between custodial sentences being given out or being reduced during the pandemic. But certainly those 3 young people have been open to every agency. They've had various experiences in terms of housing offers. One of those 3 young people has been homeless. They are young people with incredibly complex needs. And I don't think that's for want of trying from support services either. These are young people with incredibly complex family backgrounds, with incredibly damaging adverse childhood experiences, and young people, as I said, who've been in custody more than once, unfortunately.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your being so frank.
Okay, I'm going to ask the next question, and it is relating to paragraph 6.7. 6 young people have been supported in obtaining university placements, which is excellent. Do they continue receiving support or able to request support as they go through their university placement and following completion? Are we able to improve on these numbers in the future?
We're very proud of that figure. We currently have 12 young people in university, and to buck the trend really in the UK of more young people going to university than custody as care leavers is something that we are incredibly proud of as a team. I think when I first started 20 years ago, you might get 1 young person every couple of years going to university, and now we're seeing a regular intake of 5 to 10 per academic year, and I think that's really, really pleasing. I think When I'm Ready has got a lot of kind of influence there in terms of young people being able to stay in foster care longer beyond 18 to give them that extra boost and that extra year or 2 years with carers to level out the playing field with their peers. I think we would like to see young people aspire to go into university, and we're certainly keen to broaden horizons and to teach young people that you can do the same as your peers. There's no reason why, because you've gone through the care system, you couldn't go to university the same as anyone else who may have been brought up differently. I think the challenge there is finances. It is incredibly expensive to send any young person to university. Torfaen is on a par with other local authorities in terms of what we offer as our financial offer to care leavers. But obviously the more the numbers go up, the more expensive it becomes in terms of the team budget. So we continue to encourage that, but there are other options for young people as well alongside that, and we are keen to get any young person into education, training or employment, not just university, but we are, I'll say it again, very proud of that figure.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'm pleased to hear that there are 12 young people enjoying a university life at the moment. Veronica, like to come in?
Yes, if I may, thank you. I think that's a tremendous reflection of how successful certain placements have been. I just wonder if we can tweak out a little bit more information. Are they in Wales at university, or are some of them in England?
It varies. So some are supported in England and some are supported in Wales.
Well, that's excellent to hear, given the financial implications, which are so different.
Yeah.
So how many have you had go through the system in that way? And are they then continuing to be supportive up to 25, or are you finding that they are prepared to be independent once they come out of the university system?
What we tend to find is that they're often a year or two behind their peers in terms of they may have had disrupted schooling, so they may have sat GCSEs late, for example. They're then later starting that academic journey. So rather than their peers starting university at 18 and graduating at 21, our young people may not start until they're 19 and then graduate at 23, 24. Most young people, when they come out the other side of university, are ready to proceed without us. And most young people who go to university, the support is very much on a needs-led basis. So it may be contact every 6 weeks, every 3 months, as opposed to some young people who see us 5 times a week. You know, the contact is very different for those young people because generally their presenting needs are lower and the challenges are less for those young people. What we have found is the ones that have made the biggest success are the ones where the foster carers remain in touch and they remain as part of that foster family. Those are the young people who tend to make it through the kind of academic career.
That's very much, it does indicate how important foster parenting is, doesn't it? Thank you.
Okay. Janet, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, my question is the links between adults and children's support services, and it's 8.1. How do we evaluate the success of the pathway? Do we have instances where pathways aren't effective for the young person? And what level of repeat presenters do we have, and how specifically do we deal with these young people who find themselves in this position?
Rachel, shall I start with the pathway plan and then come to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So every care leaver in Torfaen has a pathway plan, which is a plan that is compiled with them just before they turn 16, which sees them through to 21. The pathway plan covers every area of that young person's life and is reviewed every 6 months by an independent reviewing officer to ensure that the social worker and the young person's advisor is keeping on top of that plan and moving young people forward positively. With regard specifically to the link between children and adult services, I'm the standing member from Children's Services on the transition panel. That panel is specifically designed to discuss young people who have additional learning needs, who have emerging or existing mental health issues, and who may require ongoing services from adult services in addition to the statutory leaving care function. The way that works is that they retain their worker within the leaving care service because they have a legal entitlement to that support, and they then are allocated a social worker or a support worker from core kind of statutory adult services. So that may be a social worker from adult mental health. We do have young people who are funded purely by health, so they are continuing healthcare funded. Those tend to be young people who have complex mental health issues. In terms of the ongoing support, there are then regular meetings to discuss between adult and children's services what support they need, who's going to deliver it, how long it's going to last for, and what that looks like. It's a very robust process that does throw up challenges for specific young people, but generally is very well embedded in Torfaen. I don't know whether Rachel's got anything to add there in terms of support packages.
Absolutely, and I suppose what I wanted to emphasise was in recent years we've done a lot of reconfiguration of service provision to bring it together into a much more coherent pathway rather than single schemes of accommodation which are scattered all over the place with support being accessed somewhere else. What we've worked to do and what will be going live in April is a much more coherent pathway for young people who are leaving care through to independent living, whether that be through sort of intensive supported accommodation, through to our enhanced support service type provision, through to independent living, sort of more on the lower end on the housing spectrum. It's a bit too early to say sort of to tell you what the success is, because what I could give you now is single information based on schemes, rather than how many people have navigated through that pathway, which we are going live with in April. So it's something that we'd be happy to bring back to you once it's had a bit of time to bed in. What we have been working hard at as well, across children, adults and housing services, is getting the support and the professionals, the right people around that table to help our young people navigate those accommodation challenges and pathways, to be able to, and I think Kate's alluded to before, to be able to sort of up and down the support needs, depending on sort of the challenges that are presented with, and those are all areas that we will be monitoring moving forward as a collective group.
Thank you. I'm sure we can take up the offer of having more information and update as the plan progresses. So thank you very much, both.
We would welcome that opportunity to come back and speak to you about it as well, and hopefully it will kind of work really, really well.
Thank you. I'm sure our chair will note that, as will Rebecca. Thank you. Ta.
Linda, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, please, Chair. My next question is around paragraph 9.3, and we've already mentioned some of the coexisting issues and connections between drug misuse, mental health, offending, homelessness. So the question really is, what sort of substance misuse services are we using, and what other agencies are involved to ensure that we've got a positive trend, which is shown in the report that, you know, there is a positive trend in this area. So what are we actually doing to ensure that that positive trend is maintained or improved, and to help young people to continue to progress to a more stable lifestyle?
I can start. I wonder whether Heidi could assist then in terms of referrals within projects, for example, to support services. We primarily work very closely with Youth Offending Service to access substance misuse services via that route. We also engage with Engage as needed, and also the Specialist Substance Misuse Service within CAMS is where we tend to refer our young people who are care leavers. The wider population are able to access the community-based resources and generally are then referred on via ourselves or via the supported housing in which they're living. In terms of drug misuse within Torfaen, it is a challenge, and I don't know whether Heidi would agree. We do see peaks and troughs, we do see patterns of usage and behaviour. The main concerns currently are around county lines rather than specific drug misuse in that respect, and that's a challenge for local authorities across the UK in terms of there's very robust procedures in place to address that and to challenge that and to support young people, but that's the current challenge for 16 plus and for social services. I don't know in terms of support services, Heidi's better placed to answer that one, or Rachel.
Yeah, happy to. So for ourselves, we have drop-ins on scheme. We're an allocated worker link, worker from Engage or Barra to come and base themselves on scheme. That breaks down the barriers for the young people trying to establish that relationship prior to any referral necessarily being made. On the back of that as well, what we've recently introduced to identify the barriers for our 18 plus clients is they have a transition worker. Historically, with a lot of the drug services, once they turned into adults, it's up to that person to engage with the service, and so to speak, if they miss 3 appointments, that's it, case closed. Whereas they're very aware that the complex young people that we're working with, that's not going to work. So allowing the transition worker to be on scheme and again build those relationships up, they're able to support 18 or post 18 without them having to go to the actual facilities themselves. They can remain on scheme, but again, relationship building and breaking down those barriers. For us then, if we're seeing any trends, we've got access to training, direct training to staff, so it's not only for Pobl relying on training, and we're able to go to Drug Aid and they'll give us bespoke training on any trends that we're seeing in the local area, and we can share that then beyond our borough. If we're aware that our trend is then going to another borough, we can share good practice and vice versa then as well.
Okay, Rachel, like to come in?
Yeah, just to echo from a wider homelessness perspective, sort of we do struggle sort of with a lot of our clients presenting with a range of substance issues. So on a more strategic footing, we've been making very good links with the Area Partnership Board and their commissioning team around drug and alcohol services. We've got very, very close links with provider agencies such as GDAS. What we are looking at the moment and hoping to roll out within the next financial year is some training to all of our support providers, which has been developed on a partnership basis, which will be provided through GDAS to basically provide all of our support services and housing services with the skills they need around and knowledge around the substance misuse arena. What we've also done on a regional level from a housing support grant perspective is we've worked with the Area Partnership Board to commission some substance misuse assertive outreach provision, which is accessible to anyone really within our community who's presenting with a substance misuse need. So we're looking quite closely at what provision that we've got around substance misuse, where we can join up and create those partnership opportunities to upskill sort of our frontline workers and work together better to make best use of our resources.
That's good to hear. I think partnership working and having all staff with the knowledge and understanding to recognise and pick up these issues is key. I come from a substance misuse background work-wise. I work with Gwent specialist substance misuse back in the late 90s. I'm sure things are a lot different now than they were back then. It's really refreshing to hear that this joined up working is now standard practice.
Thank you.
And Linda, you are coming back in again with the next question.
Yep, apologies, couldn't get my mic to come off. Yeah, regarding paragraph 9.4, the mention of the St David's Day Fund, we all wanted to know if you could elaborate on the St David's Day Fund, how this money has been used and future potential for continued funding from this avenue.
The range is huge. We've paid for young people to have classical singing lessons. We've paid for young people to go on college trips. We've paid for young people to we're trying to access equine therapy for one young person. We've paid for warm clothing. We paid for dental hygiene. We paid for laptops have gone out to most young people now. At least most young people have had at least one laptop. So many people have had two because they've been very lucky in terms of timing. We've paid for therapy for some young people where there's been specific need, and they've been mainly over the age of 18. So the St David's Day Fund primarily benefits those over 18, where there's a statutory duty, but the financial statutory duty is less. And the focus from 16 plus has always been about broadening horizons. So it's been about, increasing the young people's life experience and enabling them and empowering them to do things that they may not have considered previously. In terms of practicalities, it's also been used for starter packs for moving into young people's tenancies, which frees up some of the leaving care grant to enable that to go further, to be stretched further, because it's a challenge to make that stretch to cover everything that is needed when a young person sets up home. We've also prevented eviction for some young people in terms of provision of financial support to avoid them getting into difficulty with rent, usually linked to problems with UC, to be fair to the young people, rather than anything else. It's usually a delay in UC, or perhaps a sanction that has meant they've fallen behind with their rent and they find themselves in a difficult position. The St David's Day Fund across Wales is invaluable for care leavers, just as that additional source of funding to improve life outcomes.
So where does the St David's funding actually come from? Is it Welsh Government or?
It's Welsh Government, yeah. Yeah, it's ring-fenced specifically for care leavers.
Thank you.
Faye, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, thank you. On 11.1, it has stated that there are risks associated with capital and revenue funding associated with supporting the initiatives we've got. Can you provide further details on these funding risks and their implications? Thank you.
I can pick up some of those. In terms of aligning capital and revenue is always a really tricky thing to do. Because we are dependent on Welsh Government funding largely. What we're in a position at the moment, sort of, where, and I suppose it's a consequence of the pandemic and the policy direction of Welsh Government. There's been a significant investment within the housing arena to allow some magic to happen from our perspective. But that said, sort of the housing support grant is a grant from Welsh Government. It's something that's determined on an annual basis, although for this year, the first time I've ever known, we've been given a 3-year indicative allocation, which provides us a level of security we haven't seen before. That said, it's always subject to change. So we're constantly sort of looking for a range of funding sources and trying to balance that, particularly accessing sort of funding pots to enable us to get capital projects off the ground, looking at your bricks and mortars and your buildings, waiting for the stars to align in terms of availability of certain premises, land. It's a constant balancing act in that respect. But we in a position where we have capital, we currently have revenue, so we're able to look at the world slightly differently to be able to develop some more supported accommodation projects and single unit accommodation at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Janet, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, please. My question is in relation to paragraph 11.3. All new sites will look to include at least 50% single persons accommodation where possible. Does where possible allow developers too much wriggle room to negate this requirement?
I'm going to have to get someone to respond back to you on that point, I'm afraid. Sort of the strategic housing fund is not really my area of expertise, but it is a question that I can pass on to my colleague Leslie Groves, who'll be able to provide a more in-depth response than I'm able to at this stage, I'm afraid.
Thanks. I'm sure all members of the committee would welcome that information. Thanks, Rachel.
No worries. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. We will welcome that information when it is available from your colleague. Okay, the next question is Councillor Faye Jones again. Like to ask you a question, Faye?
Yeah, going back to the young people, we must have instances where young people are unwilling to engage with support services. I just wondered what happened and how many of those you have.
In terms of care leavers, the amount is very, very low. Currently, we have one young person refusing support out of the current population. We keep trying is the answer, is the short answer. We'll keep trying. We have a statutory duty to support care leavers, and it's very clear in the legislation what their entitlement is to support. Equally, young people post-18 have a right to say no thank you, and they have a right to step away from that support. In Torfaen, the way that we manage that is the young person's case is closed down if they request that, but it's made very clear to them that at any point until age 25 that can be reopened, so they can reconnect and they can represent. The only young person we've had over the 3-year period I alluded to in the report is a young person who was in custody, who decided that he had a long custodial sentence and there was little point in him maintaining a relationship with social services because he would have been beyond the age of statutory support when he was released. So he made the decision to sever the ties into the support. It is unusual in our area and we're well placed in that respect. It does happen, but they usually disengage for a very short period of time and then come back. Is our kind of experience, and I think Heidi might echo that in terms of a young person says, I can manage perfectly well on my own, thank you very much, I'm off, and then reappear usually a couple of months later. We don't want to create dependency, but what we do want to do is to make sure that as corporate parents we can echo what a reasonable parent would be doing for their own child leaving home. That's what our aim is always.
Yeah, to follow on. I think one of the biggest things for us is trying to find out why the person doesn't want to engage as well, and what are those barriers. So for our service, alongside with the housing officer and Kate's team, is meeting that young person prior to accessing any accommodation. So again, giving them a voice, giving them the options of what availability is out there, but also get them to have an understanding of the service, especially for us, that we can provide them. And actually their long-term goal is our long-term goal together. We're in it together, so to speak. And then for us, throughout the duration of stay, the support plan that's put in place, again, is client-led. And if there's any disengagement, again, is finding out what those reasons and those triggers are and having more of an elastic tolerance to ride through that journey with them, rather than closing the door so quickly and, again, having an effect on that revolving door. But also, if we find that they're disengaging and the placement is breaking down, we look at alternative accommodation there and then, rather than trying to keep the young person, so to speak, then they don't want to, and then they could end up being criminalised. That's one thing that we don't want. We want to avoid criminalising care leavers and young people. So again, working together as what alternative is out there, even if it's just interim. And like Cheryl mentioned earlier on, is that they move back and forth between accommodation because of the period that they're in at that moment of time.
That's very reassuring, thank you.
I suppose just to add to that, from a housing support perspective, people do disengage with us from time to time, and they've got the right to do that. But what we make clear, and what all of our support providers make clear across the board, is the door isn't closed. They're able to re-access. There's no judgment around that. And again, it's when I'm ready to engage. And what we've developed over time is multiple ways in which they can do that. For some people, sticking to appointments, they find challenging. So we've got a number of drop-in type provision available where they can go and have a chat with someone around sort of what they need at that time, and explore a bit further whether accessing a more routine level of support is suitable for them. So it's about being responsive, but equally making it clear that, you know, we'd never close the door on somebody, and if they needed any of our support services, they're able to re-access at any time.
Fabulous, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask the last question. Hang on. Okay, the strategy comes to an end this year. Have we evaluated the impact of the strategy? Have we identified which actions have been successful or not as successful, and what work is being done to prepare for a new strategy?
I'll start, Rachel, you can add in.
Okay.
I suppose that, yeah, the strategy does come to an end. It's been a regional strategy and a lot of projects there. Through COVID, obviously, some of those projects have been delayed, but all of us are working behind the scenes on like phase 2 plans. Welsh Government have given different projects for us to do. So we are doing those. And I suppose it will be coming back at some stage when we get back to some kind of normality, how we then look at the regional projects, because we're still having regional network meetings across all the local authorities in Gwent and even wider against those as well. So we are working closely, but we are trying to develop our own projects now linked to the strategy, but obviously future plans will be going forward then as well.
Yeah, and I suppose just to add to that, the strategic and policy landscape from a Welsh Government perspective is shifting at the moment. What we're moving towards is housing and housing support grant strategies, the draft of which is currently sort of going through approvals at the moment. And again, sort of some of the themes in that, it is around looking at sort of in making sure that we've got the right support in the right place at the right time to meet the needs of our homeless population, essentially. Equally, sort of from a Welsh Government perspective, on a policy landscape, they're keen not to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the learning through COVID. And I think Cheryl mentioned earlier that everybody in approach, it's really kind of given a strong impetus to think differently about homelessness, to think about our approaches. And what we're being encouraged to do is develop what is currently being called rapid rehousing approaches and embed those within our policies and strategies on a locality basis alongside a regional basis, and therefore sort of echoing the national drives. That work is all ongoing at the moment. I think what Welsh Government are completely acknowledging at this stage is that they're hearing us. They're hearing the challenges that we've had to embrace through COVID. They're hearing that unblocking some of those challenges and unblocking some of our accommodation and move on is not going to be something that we can do sort of this year or even next year. It's a much longer term approach, and working with us to be able to do that. But equally, what they're quite keen to do is, when we're looking at our rapid rehousing approaches, is making sure that we're trying to streamline our systems and getting people into accommodation as swiftly as possible, but equally acknowledging the challenges that we're facing. It's, rapid rehousing in some ways, it could be considered a misleading phrase, but it's more around sort of systems and processes to enable people to access the right accommodation first time, as opposed to being bounded around sort of different systems and approaches. So that those are things that we'll probably be hearing about much more in the future. Does that answer your questions?
It does answer my question, Rachel. Thank
you.
Thank you very much. And Faye, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, I just wondered, does that mean as this bit has come to an end that you will have to do all new plans now moving forward, obviously taking your knowledge with you, but there'll be a new way of working, new plans, and it'll develop on in the future?
Absolutely, and those are things that we're currently working on now, sort of with Welsh Government. Actually, sort of it's very much been sort of a collaborative arrangement. Sort of there's a number of workshops that are ongoing around sort of what the future looks like for housing, what the policy direction looks like for housing. We've recently seen Welsh Government publish the Ending Homelessness high-level action plan, should I say, which sets out a bit of a direction and a timeline for moving towards sort of a new policy baseline for us.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings to an end our questioning. I would like to thank officers and guests for their attendance and participation in the meeting this morning. Thank you very much for your candid and accurate answers, and I'd like to invite you now to leave the meeting so members can discuss and formulate our recommendations. Just for clarity, Rebecca, none of the officers present are asked to return for later agenda items, are they?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. It's been lovely meeting you, and I hope you have a good day, and looking forward to working with you again next year. Who knows? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
That was fascinating. I've learnt a lot from that. It just rounded out the report extremely well.
Yes. Okay, so the scrutiny activity is on page 32, paragraph 13.1.
Thank you, Chair. Do members need me to refresh them on the scrutiny activity, or are you happy to go straight into making your recommendations? If I just quickly go through the scrutiny activity then, yeah?
You can refresh our memories, Rebecca.
No problem, Chair. So as a committee, you've been asked to review the information contained within the report and the regional homelessness strategy that was attached as an appendice, aimed at preventing homelessness for younger people and supporting their well-being, and you've been asked to determine whether the actions being undertaken and those which are in the planning process will achieve a reduction in homelessness for younger people and will support their well-being, and following on from that, make any recommendations to the executive member with regards to your scrutiny activity today. So members, would you like to offer any recommendations before I raise any of the notes that I made from your discussions today? Councillor Clarkson, you?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I think digital inclusion screamed out from that. We need to support them in their efforts to get digital inclusion across their client group. And regarding determining whether the actions undertaken are going to reduce homelessness, they are managing somehow, but with the problems we've got in the wider accommodation market, without us looking at those issues, I think it's going to be very difficult for them, whether or not there'd be more ring fencing of properties, which again is going to take away from families. This is such a complex issue. So it's not whether it's a fair question or not, really, with what they're actually up against. They were quite frank in saying that they've been blocked due to COVID, and it's going to take them a year to 2 years to try and even just undo that block. And goodness knows where we're going to be with the general population and the homelessness issues by that time. So we can see the efforts that they're making, but whether or not, without wider assistance and wider collaboration, rather than, specifically looking at their client group, everyone's really up against it. That's my concern across the board with the housing situation.
Can I come in there in terms of the housing situation?
Yes, Veronica.
I think it's very important that there is close liaison with the various housing providers and with planning. There have been various schemes which have been approved and aren't going forward at the moment, mainly because of COVID and the economic problems. I think we need to do all we can to ensure that things do move as swiftly as they possibly can do. And also that the large housing schemes that come forward do quite clearly show single person accommodation. Some of them we've agreed do, but we need to ensure that going forward into the future.
I don't think they're even hitting affordable housing quotas, are they? It is a concern with the larger housing developments, and with the current economic situation, the developers are just going to drag their feet even further. You know, they've got that 5-year window, haven't they, to bring anything forward, and then they're just getting extensions. It's so difficult at the moment, and Torvine's running out of land. I think it's going to be the emphasis is on converting the buildings, like the Pearl House. And there are other large shops in Pontypool, which I can't see they're ever going to work as shops again, but they could work as single-person accommodation.
Which Bon Avon has already been doing, and also Melin.
We've done it with quite a few houses in Pontypool and a few in Cwmbran, but there seems to be more scope. A lot of the house properties are privately owned, so then you've got the issues of purchasing. But some of these big shops, you know, lower ground, you know, but they're huge, some of them. I can't see anyone ever taking them up in that capacity, but yeah, planning. The double-edged sword, isn't it?
Okay, thank you, members.
Okay, Faye, do you want to come in next, please?
Yeah, I think they mentioned that we do have gaps with some of our housing providers in their understanding of complex situations, and they're dealing with it. And I mean, I have an ongoing case at the moment, and I think sometimes there's massive gaps with the community young people are put in and the type of accommodation they're put into. And I just wondered, could we ask, could there be more work done in the community in preparation for young people to be put into certain areas? And could we be tightening up with those providers who perhaps haven't got the way for all of the complexities of taking on these young people?
Thank you.
Okay, Janet, like to come in, please?
Yes, please. It's very pleasing that some of our young people have managed to go off to university, but I would like to see if we can have working better with commercial businesses to try and get some of the youngsters into a skills employment. You know, we're going to be short of skills employment, electricians, plumbers, and not everybody wants to go to university, but they might welcome some sort of an apprenticeship. And I'd like to see greater working to help provide our young people with the opportunity to get into full-time employment.
Would that be sort of kickstart, Rebecca?
Yeah, and I think like
into the employability and
inspire to work and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, I endorse everything we said about going into, like Linda said, using existing buildings, because I do think that our developers, and as we're running out of land, if we can get more housing for single people, so I would endorse the use of taking up empty properties and having them reconfigured into suitable housing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, members. Rebecca, do you have anything to add from the notes that you have made during the question and answer session?
Yeah, just I think I had one more, Chair, that members haven't already covered off. So the first one I noted was the one Councillor Faye Jones has just raised with regards to the housing associations. Then there was the issue about the digital and Wi-Fi, because they said they were taking that to the corporate parenting panel, so I'm sure some weight of the committee's voice behind that would also help that. I didn't know there was also the issue they mentioned with regards to the private rental sector and their lobbying of Welsh Government with regards to the £35 a week. So I didn't know if you wanted to make some sort of recommendation to the exec member again, that he puts some more weight in behind that issue and increasing that figure, because I believe they said it was over £100.
Yes,
there was a couple of action points then, Chair, which are not recommendations, but I will note in the action plan with regards to the update on the pathway plans that Councillor Jones raised.
That's right,
and also the response to the question again on that planning issue with regards to 50% of new developments. Also, I'll note in the commentary section with regards to the new strategy that they'll be developing, that be brought back, the draft strategy, for input from the committee before that progresses.
Okay. So, thank you, Rebecca. Can we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 7, update of recommendations. Can you introduce this report, please, Rebecca?
Certainly, Chair, thank you. So yes, as the Chair mentioned, this is the update report that you receive annually on the progress and impact of accepted recommendations. So you'll note that on this occasion, the report summarises the recommendations made since September 2020, a high proportion of which have been accepted or considered for adoption by the executive member. It's advised that it's sensible to reflect on what the extent recommendations have been embedded and acted as a catalyst for delivering service improvement. So to ensure the impact of scrutiny is properly evaluated and recommendations are not just accepted but acted upon, a summary of progress has been produced by service areas against each scrutiny item that you've received, including a progress update for each recommendation previously accepted or to be considered. Any that were rejected obviously haven't been included in this update. So can I just remind members, you're not actually here to re-scrutinise each of these items. It's merely to determine whether you are satisfied with the progress that has been made on implementing the recommendations that you made and that were accepted, or whether you wish to maintain these updates on future annual monitoring reports. So members, if I go through them one by one. So the first update you've received is the Regional Homelessness Strategy recommendations. Are members satisfied with those updates, or is that an item that you would wish to maintain on annual monitoring?
Personally, I think it's an item that should be reviewed annually.
Yeah, especially in light of, obviously, you've received some sort of update today in terms of the young people, but this is something that's going to be developed, obviously, now with a new plan going forward. So. Thank you, members. I'll note that one to stay on monitoring.
Yeah.
The next one was the transformation of adult mental health services in Gwent and the public engagement. As you'll recall, this is an item that an Ira and Bevan Health Board brought forward before the committee. So again, members, are you satisfied with the responses that you've received to that and the progress, or is that again something you'd wish to maintain a monitoring stance on?
I think I'd personally like to maintain a monitoring stance because this is a recovering service. It's been in difficulty. It's on its way up, but there's still a way to go yet with CAMS.
Okay, thank you. I'll note that one to be maintained.
Yes, I also think that this is something that we should receive updates upon, because of course the strategy involved a large capital expenditure at St Cadoc's, and I personally would like to be kept in the picture of how well this development is progressing, or not, if that's the case.
Okay, good Chair. Moving on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Crick. Yeah.
Yes, if I can just really endorse that, and especially given the mental health problems that have become very apparent during the last couple of years and aren't going to go away very quickly.
Absolutely. Thank you, members. I've noted that one. The next one then is the update on recommendation with regards to the scrutiny activity on managing housing demand.
That's always going to be an issue. So, I mean, again, we should keep this on our agenda and get regular update specs. Chair.
Okay.
This is only going to get worse.
Given the economic problems which are starting to emerge, this is going to get worse, and we really do need to keep tight control of what's going on.
Yeah, so many people have maxed out on the mortgage with the 0% interest.
Yeah.
If this interest rate carries on going up, we're going to have defaults. It's going to be a reminder of the 80s all over again, and they're going to, the social housing's just not there anymore to put them into this.
Yes, people are going to be in negative equity again, aren't they?
Back into negative equity, yeah. Well, maybe not. Like house prices have rocketed. I couldn't afford to move on now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then the final update then is the T22 review of the family placement team.
Again, I think this is very needed and we need to keep an eye on it.
So members, just to remind you, obviously you've received these updates, but these are issues that will then feed into the visioning process in the summer when the new committee undertakes their visioning process for the items ahead. So yes. I've noted that we would like to see those revisited in any future scrutiny activities.
Yes, please.
Thank you, members.
Excuse me, I need to take this call.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, members, for an excellent meeting this morning. Very enjoyable, very thought-provoking. Okay, we're going to move into the pre-election period now. So this is my last meeting as chair. Irrespective of the results in May, I will not be continuing to chair this committee next year, so you will have a different chair. And so I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions over the last 18 months. I think we've had quite a comprehensive programme, and it's been very enjoyable. And I think we've made some important recommendations to the executive members. Of course, this year's senior officers, Keith and Jill, are retiring, so I'd like to wish them a happy retirement and thank them for their dedicated years of service to this authority. As I said, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to members for their contributions over the last 18 months, and Rebecca for guiding us quite, I wouldn't say with a firm hand, but guiding us with an authoritative hand. So I'm feeling a little emotional because this is my last meeting, but I mean, I may depending upon the elections. Well, no, I don't think whatever happens, I will be remaining on this committee. So it's been wonderful experience chairing it, and well, I will see members at other meetings prior to the pre-election period, but I don't. But if I don't see you again, Rebecca, thank you very much for everything you've done, and I'd like to say goodbye to everyone now, and close the meeting. Of course, I can't say when the next meeting will be, but it will be the visiting session for next year's programme of meetings. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye.
Thank you, Richard, for being such a good chair.
Yeah. Bye. Let's go off and see the royal visit now. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.